Catherine, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thank you once again to Tipton Training for their very kind invitation to do this, the third of my webinars in a series. I started off doing failing implants, and then I did bone biology, and this is guided bone regeneration and bone grafting. It's not so much a one or the other, a one versus the other. It's really guided bone regeneration and bone grafting, and really giving you a little bit of an indication of when you would do one and when you would do the other. It's giving you the tools and the armamentarium really to make decisions clinically of which you would choose to do, how you would go about doing them, whether you would be taking staged approaches or whether you would be doing immediate implantation with some guided bone regeneration, or whether you would be doing a staged approach of doing bone grafting, implantation, or whether you'd be doing immediate implantation, or whether you'd be doing immediate implantation with immediate loading, whether you'd be doing immediate implantation with guided bone regeneration and a delayed loading, and all the various protocols that you have there at your fingertips. So, what are essentially the key factors that are going to lead to ultimate aesthetics? What I've noticed doing dental implants now for over 30 years, in fact, my first case I did was in 1984. Long before most of you were either born or definitely long before most of you were fully qualified, was that you require a stable bone volume and architecture. Now that is vitally important if you think about aesthetic implants. And when you're looking at the architecture of the soft tissue, you require correct three-dimensional placement of that implant with adequate soft tissue volume and adequate soft tissue thickness to create a biological seal at the implant abutment interface. Team Atlanta always used to say that the bone sets the tone and the issue may be the issue. Added to that, I think, Dietmar Weng from Germany stated that the clue may well be in the screw, and an early or a one-time abutment placement may well contribute to that, along with the transmucosal form, contour, and material of the abutments that allows you to develop and maintain soft tissue volume. And of course, you need to be able to maintain whatever is there. So if you think about this stable bone volume and architecture, the correct placement of the implant in relation to this stable bone volume and architecture, how much bone do you actually require to be around the implant that allows that bone to be stable? Well, if you think about it, that your bone, any of you guys that were here on the last lecture about bone biology and the importance of remodeling of the bone that goes on, the stability of the bone is vitally important in relation to the load that goes onto the bone. So you think logically about the correct three-dimensional placement of that implant in relation not just to the aesthetics, but to the occlusal load that is going to be applied to that implant, then that has to be in a correct stability in relation to the volume of the bone and the architecture of that bone Otherwise, you're going to put excessive forces, which is going to adversely affect the volume and quantity of that bone. What about the adequacy of soft tissue volume? What we're referring to here is really attached mucosa. Now, if we haven't got adequate thickness, i.e. the biological seal, at the implant abutment interface, we are going to see a negative impact on the longevity of aesthetic harmony, and not just aesthetic harmony. We're going to see an impact on oral hygiene. We're going to see an impact on the bacteriological harmony and the bacteriological seal that we're going to have at this interface, which will impact on the long-term harmony and health of this tissue. The early placement, the number of times that you think logically about it, a lot of implants, you look at the manufacturer's recommendation for placement, whether it is placed supracoronally to the crest of the bone, whether it is placed crestally, or whether it is placed by some manufacturers to be subcrestally, is significant. And where you place that implant in relation to the crest of the bone, and then the number of times that you interfere with that implant abutment connection, will have a significant impact long-term on where that crestal bone finishes. So the form, the contour, and the material of the abutment will also have an impact on what that crestal bone does. Should you have the crestal bone maintain its position, you can then develop soft tissue contours, and you can maintain the soft tissue volume if all these other parameters are in place. And of course, maintenance being how easy and adaptable is the restoration that you're actually placing upon this implant to being cleaned. Is it particularly easy for the patient to maintain it? Is it particularly easy for the hygienist to demonstrate to that particular patient? And this is something we do with every single patient, whether it's a single tooth to a full arch or a partial restorative on implants. They are specifically shown and given the right tools, whether it be TPs, superfloss, certain type of brush, whether it is a water flosser, or whatever that implement may well be, to how to clean that device. And I think that's vitally important that that is recorded in the notes and it is down to the patient. Regular recall, obviously, to check up on the maintenance, the oral hygiene, and occasionally removing the appliance to check out on how the patient is maintaining it, is another vital part of the routine recall. And I think that should be written into the patient notes contemporaneously. Vitally important from a medico-legal point of view, and it protects yourself. So the principles of bone regeneration is essentially a barrier membrane. How do I get rid of my picture up here? Oh, gone back. Is there a way of doing it? Yeah, here we are. Where's my mouse? No, I can't see it. Oh well, we'll have to work around it. Principles of bone regeneration is essentially utilizing a barrier membrane and a bone substitute of some form, a material with the following properties, where it can be osteoconductive or inductive, ideally inductive properties. And the type of material that we have is grafts, Ideally, autogenous bone grafts are the gold standard as to what people would normally say. Bone substitute materials would be classified as allografts. They could be either human tissue, living, or cadaver bone. Then we have xenografts, which would be bovine, equine, or porcine. And then the alloplasts, which are synthetic materials. What is absolutely fantastic today in what we can do with allografts, xenografts, and alloplasts is to use CAD/CAM technology from the CT scans that we take, and we can actually have grafts manufactured to the defect size and shape as to what we wish to recreate. And this takes all the guesswork out of what we are trying to reproduce, and the graft can be manufactured to that defect perfectly. When we are looking at autogenous grafts, we have intraoral sites, and we have also extraoral sites that we can use. My preference is to go for an intraoral site. The site that I tend to go for the most is the external oblique. You can get quite a significant amount of bone from this area. I used to originally start with the mentalis area. That is quite a challenging area to work with. It is quite a painful area to work from. A lot of patients do report quite a lot of post-operative morbidity and discomfort. Another area, if I do not wish to harvest too much bone, is to go to the subnasal, and I go to that area if I wish to harvest a smallish amount of bone, a circular trephine of bone quite often. That gives quite a nice result. But invariably, I will take the block of bone from the external oblique, and there are lots of places, courses, etc. available that you can go on. One of the most notorious is Fuad Khoury over in Germany. He does an awesome course on bone plates, which is pretty amazing. I would thoroughly recommend that to anybody who wishes to go and further their knowledge on bone grafting, and you will come away with that with an incredible skill set. One of the advances that we're seeing today in allografts, which I'm going to show you a little bit about later if we still have time, is the bone struts and the bone rings, which are cadaver bone, which are very, very useful. They need to be very well hydrated. And I've had quite a bit of success utilizing those. I've used xenografts, bovine quite significantly in granular form, and I have used some alloplasts. In fact, I need to have a conversation with Peter Fairbairn. I'm looking to start using some ethos. I've not used it before. I have used TCP many, many years ago, but I'm looking to start getting back involved in using synthetic materials. Patients are getting a little bit fussy with bovine. So Pete, you can expect a call from me fairly soon. So, biological activity. We know that osteogenic grafts contain living cells which proliferate in the site and stimulate new bone formation. Osteoinductive grafts are proteins like bone morphogenic proteins, BMPs. There used to be a fad a few years ago that we were thinking, yeah, BMPs are going to be the new thing. The reason why they're not here is they are mega expensive to make. They induce differentiation of mesenchymal cells into osteoblasts, which leads to bone formation. Osteoconductive are grafts and bone substitutes that serve as passive networks, frameworks, which are the vast majority of all the bone graft materials that we see on the market for bone tissue apposition. So essentially, biological activity that we see in most of the bone substitute materials that we see today, osteoconductive, autograft, i.e. bone that you've just taken out of a patient, especially if it's got a blood supply attached to it, is osteoconductive, osteogenic, and osteoinductive. Allografts are only osteoconductive. Xenografts and alloplasts are all osteoconductive. They have none of the other osteogenic or osteoinductive potential. In other words, all the materials that you see that are on the market today basically act like a scaffolding system. And it's a scaffolding system that the host bone grows into. So when you're doing some kind of guided bone regeneration or a grafting process of some sort, you've got to be able to allow the host to grow into that site. So you've got to do either some penetration of the surface of the area that you're working on, or you're within a socket allowing one key item to come through, and that is red blood, nothing else. If you were watching the bone biology, you remember that the first thing that happens in bone healing biology is hemostasis. After hemostasis, you get the inflammatory phase. So you need blood to come into the site. That's vitally important. What you need, the membrane activity. A lot of people will say you don't need a membrane, especially when you're looking at certain things like alloplasts. They reckon that the mucoperiosteum is the best membrane you've got. Well, the functions of a membrane should be a barrier function to prevent soft tissue proliferation. It should stop bone substitute stabilization. It should be improvement of the bone regeneration and improvement of the treatment prognosis, whether you're utilizing PTFE, Gore-Tex, any of the membranes that are commercially available. It should be there, it should break down, and you should look at the way that it breaks down, whether it's non-resorbable, a synthetic PTFE, whether it's a plastic, a non-plastic, titanium membranes that can give you super support, non-resorbable membranes like an autogenous connective tissue, allogenic, as in alloderm, a xenograft, porcine, bovine, origin being collagen, or a synthetic like a polylactic acid, polymers, any of those that will give you the support, not be too inflammatory. How long do you want them to last? The non-resorbable ones are going to be there until you take them out. The biggest problem with the non-resorbable ones is that if they become exposed, you lose everything. The resorbable ones will have a definitive lifetime, and that is the biggest problem with them. So you pay your money, you take your choice. What are the expectations that you have of your membranes? You need them to be biocompatible with a non-toxic behavior. You need them to maintain space. They have to be totally stable. They have to give you reinforcement for the regeneration of the tissue that you are regenerating. They have to be totally impermeable for epithelial and soft tissue cells. Permeability for liquids. They must have tissue integrity, for the external surface of the membrane should integrate with the surrounding tissue and stabilize the wound. And they've got to be easy to use. Some of them is like trying to stitch spaghetti. Nightmare. So you look at the way that they function, the way they resorb, enzymatic reduction versus acidic reduction. I personally prefer the enzymatic. If you look at the collagen resorption of them, it's a little bit like the Krebs cycle in there. It's some complex science going on in these systems. If you want to spend an evening going through them and you can't sleep, just pick up a chemistry book on the way that enzymatic degradation goes on. It's fabulous to send you to sleep, trust me. So what's the properties of collagen? Collagen tends to favor cell adhesion, migration, and proliferation. It's got wonderful hemostatic properties, gives great primary wound closure, main structural protein in the body, and it may be used as a 3D matrix in soft tissue healing. If you look at the work by Postlethwaite over in 1978, it looked at the chemotactic attraction of human fibroblasts to type 1, 2, and 3 collagen and collagen-derived peptides. Great paper, shows you how nice wound healing closes with a collagen membrane. Beautiful. So, let's look at some cases. Fractured post-crowns are probably one of the highest sources of single teeth that you will ever do implant-wise. And you've got to analyze very closely what's going on at the apex of these teeth. I am not a huge fan, personally, of taking teeth out that have got massive areas apically and placing an implant immediately. If I look at this, you'll see that there's quite a bit of an attachment of soft tissue around where the fracture of the tooth has occurred around the post. If I look at the healing, I see that there's quite a defect there. And I take the view that I will wait 10 to 12 weeks for this to heal. I am in no rush to go in to place an implant in an area which has had a fractured post-crown and there's suppuration coming from the root. For me, that is a no-go. It's a personal choice, and you guys might think that you can clean the area out beautifully, but I don't feel confident enough to do that. So when I actually uncover this defect, I think here, what do I do? Now, I think it's a significant defect, and I knew full well that this was going to require some kind of regeneration. Now, what can I fill that defect with? I measure it, it's quite a significant defect. It probably measures something in the region mesiodistally of roughly, I don't know, 8 millimeters. Look at it from a buccolingual point of view, it's about 6 mil. And look at it from the apicocoronal point of view, it's around 7 millimeters again. Now, what are the choices of material that I have here? I'm going to do some guided bone regeneration, but the most significant material I'm going to use to fill that defect is titanium. So, the first thing we're going to do is place the implant in the correct 3-dimensional position, so that I'm going to obliterate most of the defect with a 3.5 or a 4.5 millimeter diameter implant. Make sure that I have got good primary stability and make sure that I have the correct 3-dimensional positioning. Now, if you're uncomfortable with doing this freehand, get a computerized surgical guide made. That will ensure that your implant positioning is correct 3-dimensionally. You can have a full guide made, or you can have a positioning guide made so that you're comfortable with where you are. The angulation of this implant is significantly important. If you're going to place this far too far to the buccal aspect, you have destroyed any chances of getting an aesthetic outcome. Now, having ensured that your implant position is well within host bone, what you've then got to do is do some guided bone regeneration for one purpose only, not to support the implant, but to support the soft tissue. So the next phase in my treatment planning is to place a membrane, and in this situation, I placed BioGuide, and I fixated the BioGuide with 2 bone tacks. When the BioGuide is placed with the bone tacks, it can act like a little curtain. It's not going anywhere. It becomes very, very simple, very easy to use and manipulate. And I place it whole. I don't even trim it to size. I place it, I fold it as a double layer technique as applied by Danny Boozer. And then that is a very simple thing to trim so I can position it and do everything. I have then placed an anorganic bovine bone to build up and overbuild that situation. My next phase is to take my scissor, surgical scissor, and trim the membrane into size and into position, and then fold the membrane over and ensure that my implant abutment interface, as you can see from the X-ray, is very deep. This is a system that allows for that implant abutment interface to be buried quite deeply. And as you can see from that we've got very, very good, healthy soft tissue with the implant abutment interface being buried very, very deep. The next thing we do, looking at that, is to try and develop the soft tissue profile. And you can see there, looking at the ovate style pontic that we've made here. If you look at the work that Nitzan Bichacho has developed with Kobe Landsberg over in Tel Aviv, they are very fond of doing ovate pontics, that they can manipulate the way that the tissue works and develop the contours and the shape. And what they would do in a situation like this is press fairly hard on the tissues, on the mesial and on the distal. And of course, this is a provisional crown, so the color isn't particularly good. And we can then work this towards the final definitive crown. And I have to compliment the technician there on doing a magnificent job on the day of delivery. And if we see this a year or so, maybe 5 years down the line, then we can see that that is quite an exceptional job. And if we look at that in a CT, that is, for me, quite an exceptional result. I think that was probably taken about 10 years post-operatively, post-insertion. You can see how the stability of that bone in the buccal 1/3 towards the coronal aspect of the crown is beautifully thick. The cortical plate is well defined, and that bundle bone is very, very healthy, which is what I would anticipate. I think you follow the principles of the guidance that I laid out earlier for the principles for key guidance to aesthetic outcomes where you have good bone architecture, then it works. Nice result. Consistency. which is what we're looking for. Let's look at another case. This was a very, very young girl who, real shame. She was 18 years of age, and her life was blighted by this horrific tooth at the front of her mouth. You know, it was like impacted severely on her life. And of course, it's just like being a dental cripple turning up with this. You sort of like take it out and make a Rochette bridge for her. And you can see that there's quite a significant defect there. So again, we take this out, we can place an implant, but it's not enough to do that. The implant is solid, it's great, no problem at all, but the soft tissue would be horrific. So we need to think about some guided bone regeneration simply to boost the soft tissue contours. And of course we can do that. And as we see what we can do, we can develop it, we can work around it, and we can do a little modified Palachi technique here by splitting the tissues. As you can see there, bulk up the mesial and distal so that we can provisionalize this for her. And we sent this off then to her referring practitioner to be able to literally change her life forever. That's the provisional crown that we gave him. And we allowed him then to develop what he could. One of the biggest problems I gave him here was probably a little bit too much soft tissue. But again, utilizing the principles of Kobe Landsberg, you can work with that soft tissue, and for a prosthodontist worth his salt, he can really make that into something pretty spectacular. And what was lovely about this is her mother came in about 4 or 5 years later, and she spent some serious amount of money having a full arch of implants done. And the first thing she actually did was burst into tears and say, "You gave me my daughter back, and I can't thank you enough." And she said, "Now you've got to perform a miracle and give me my smile back." So he started working on this, and you can see the mesial coming on, but he never really gave me the pictures towards the end. He just showed me how he was working on it. Anyway, let's look at the efficacy of we're running out of time, sadly, and I want to get onto some more serious stuff where we look at fractured post-crown again. You look how serious this is. Look at the size of defect there. This was a significant defect looking at the cone beam CT. When we look at it in reality, there was very, very little bone to work with. Here I took 2 large pieces of bone from the external oblique, built it all up. Now, when I do this and place an implant, I will always put a bit of anorganic bovine bone over the surface of that, because I just think it never resorbs, and that stays for my soft tissue nicely. Use one of the custom abutments, and we got a nice result for her. That was about 15 years ago, and you can see how beautifully healthy the whole thing is. Again, 3 years from that situation. Look at another situation that we have here. Took the tooth out, big defects. You can see the size of the defect, 2 big blocks of bone. Always put some anorganic bovine over the surface of it, immediately loaded into a grafted site. We then did a soft tissue graft as we temporized it. Now that doesn't look particularly great the day that we inserted the final crown. I should have had a bit more confidence to make that more triangular shape, But if you look at that a good few years down the line, you can see the hyperplastic activity of the tissue mesially and distally. That was 11 years down the line. So let's look at the factors that influence the successful grafting, graft stability, space maintenance, blood supply, and implant stability. If you don't have those, your graft is gone. We look at chin grafts. I used to do these years ago. Take big chunks of chin away. They really hurt the patient. I don't do these anymore, but they gave you lots of bone. This is one that I quite liked doing a long time ago when I would make a little line top above the central and lateral incisor. You've got to go virtually parallel to the floor of the nose. And then what I do is I use my retaining screw, do it before I remove it, so that you know it's fairly easy to hold on to it. This is my lag going through. I do this as a staged approach. Do all the preparation while it's fixed in place, and then it's far easier to work with. Gareth Jenkins taught me this technique. He would then break it all up. What I do is then position it on the site where there's a big horizontal vertical defect. If there is a bridge onto the mesial, that lateral incisor, I know I can build my bone to that site, refer this back then to the referring practitioner with the screwdriver, remove that screw, then he can place his implant. Cover the whole thing up. And suture it down. Today I will cover that up, as I'll show you later on, with some GRGF. So today I go on to utilizing bone rings. These are the Botis bone rings. I was involved with Jan Kielhorn and Bernd Giesenhagen and Ocean Yuxel when these first came out. Bernd Giesenhagen was the original inventor of the bone rings when he used to do them from the chin and the external oblique. And then we developed these Cerebone with Botis, which was then taken over by Straumann. I think these are pretty damn good, actually. They need to be very well hydrated. Prepare the osteotomy through the bone ring. This one was very, very close to that central incisor. prepare the bed with a trephine, insert the ring, and then again do the osteotomy through the ring. If you don't hydrate these enough, they break. You can tell who this was sponsored by. But you get the idea. We now just cover that up and put some blocks, etc. over it, tack it into place. Again, we do another one down at the bottom here, but I won't bore you with that because we're running out of time a little bit. This is a fairly interesting one. Again, showing you similar sort of situation and how we do this. Looking at a case where we have very little thickness here. I debated on this whether or not I could get an implant into position and do some GBR over the surface of this. She was a very, very sweet young lady, this, and because of her age, I kind of thought I would be better off long term, because she was only late 20s, early 30s. I thought I would be better off really doing a block graft here. So I went to the external oblique and got a block, and as you can see on the bottom right of the screen, we perforated quite significantly. We placed quite a big piece of bone, which we took from the external oblique, and then we covered it with some PRGF, which we use quite routinely now. I do like to use that because you do tend to get some beautiful bone healing, and I think it really gives some beautiful results. What I have done a fair few of is use bone plates, which I think is quite nice. It gives a lack of comorbidity. And if you look at the situation that you can build up, it's quite significant. And if you see this procedure being carried out, this was done by my good friend Jan Kielhorn. Very nice technique utilizing the bone struts. You obviously have to be very protective. You see the bone strut there. You have to cut it to shape. Then what you do is create a shelf. Always do your preparation for screws outside the mouth, otherwise you're on a hiding to nothing. See, the shelf has been created so it kind of sits somewhere. This is where you need to be an octopus. One of the nice things available today is a lot of CAD/CAM in this material. You can get it made in the shape that you want. It's not cheap. You're looking at probably around £1,500, but it's actually made as a saddle that will go over that area, and you can actually screw it into position, and they are pretty spectacular. Use them a couple of times. They're pretty amazing to use. Because we're running a little bit short of time. The biggest issue you have over this is closure. Not the easiest, but you can imagine. You have to then shape it up like you do with any graft. Try and cover that then with some PRGF. Gives you some nice results. You get the idea. Fill it up. PRGF over it. I think we need a little bit more time than we've had today. Looking at the bone ring situation again, you can see on the left of the screen we have an implant in place there. This was not the partial extraction therapy group. This was the partial idiot therapy group, I think. The person who put this implant in didn't realize that he'd left most of the tooth in place. The implant came in, the patient complained that it was loose. It had only been in his mouth for a period of about, I don't know, 6 months. Asked me what was happening. So I said, we've got a bit of a problem that the tooth has been left in place. I'll remove the implant for you. Let's have a look at what's going on. So I removed the rest of the tooth. And what was really quite surprising, the referring practitioner, when he was a sort of acquaintance of mine, had never taken a post-op x-ray to check what was going on. So he said, would you do it for me and I'll pay your bill? I said, well, yeah, it will cost you. And said, can you do mates rates? And I said, yeah, I do mates rates, but we're not mates, are we? So anyway, that did cost him a significant amount. This is something that people have got so much of the hots for at the moment. Partial extraction therapy, PET. One of my very, very dear close friends, Howard Gluckman, in Cape Town, I think is one of the most amazing oral surgeons on the planet. He is so talented and gifted. He's probably done thousands of these. I am personally not a huge fan. It's not something that I feel I have a problem that I need to be doing them. I have done a few where I've left, as you can see, some of the root in place. It's not something that I feel it's an issue. I know why they do it. It's to preserve that bundle plate of bone. My own preference is, if you think logically about it, I have a scenario like this where you can see that this was a root canal that was attempted. It's marginally short of the apex. In fact, one of my very, very good friends, Ian Charlesworth, who reminded me at 6 o'clock tonight I was doing this seminar, because I'd totally forgotten about it, would probably tell me that's pretty standard for a lot of cases he has to retreat. We see the case in the mouth. The patient came in, had a kick, daughter had kicked her, while playing, snapped the root. We look at the socket when I've taken the tooth out. I place the implant. Now you look at the distance between the facial of the implant and the root there. There needs to be a gap there. We all know that. Dennis Tarnow reckons you can leave the gap. If you think about the resorptive pattern of the maxilla, it's centripetal, isn't it? It goes backwards and upwards. Now, I believe that this is, again, guided bone regeneration. I fill that with an anorganic bovine because we know it never resorbs. And all that happens is that that bone resorbs backwards and upwards. So it folds onto the head of the implant. Seal it with an abutment, 1 time 1 abutment. Make a temporary, keep it out of occlusion. Make sure it's very light on heavy occlusion. There's the temporary. There's the implant crown in place. Do black and white, as John Hubbard always used to say. There's the restorative. Beautiful results. Nice result. So we look at this, finished, and we look at it how many years down the line? Look at the way that bone goes. 17 years. Wow. I could only do the CT because she broke another tooth. And I thought, I want to see this. Love it. Thank you all for your very kind attention. It's always a pleasure to do some webinars for my old mate, Paul. We go back a long way, and it's great fun. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you for giving up your Thursday evening. And please, everybody, stay safe with this COVID-19 going on. It's extremely frustrating being a dentist at the moment. I feel for you all. It's not much fun. It's slow, it's hard, but let's hope and pray that we all get back to a degree of normality soon. Thank you, Catherine.